You should see me down in my studio on the Mac
Yeah.
with the music program Logic.
Yeah.
I am some kind of techno wizard.
Mm-hmm.
I come up here to my PC and try to use like a word processor, and I'm a complete moron.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't even know how to turn a Mac on.
Do you know Richie York?
No, I don't.
Okay. Richie York is a rather famous rock and roll journalist who's from Brisbane, and he moved to Canada in the late 60s, and he was hung out with John and Yoko, and he was at the Bed-In where they recorded the song Give Peace a Chance, and he hung out with them and Ronnie Hawkins and did that whole thing. And he's recently written a memoir about it called Christ, You Know It Ain't Easy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also done a couple of books with Led Zeppelin. He hung out with them during the early 70s in their heyday. And he was in Toronto and he wrote for the big newspaper here. And every band that came to town, he introduced them. He was the MC, I guess, if you will, and the master of ceremonies. And anyway, I've gotten to know him over the years, and he is a really nice fella. He was a big Klaatu fan, and I've recently been working with this woman, and she's written like a screenplay about the band, and it's called Sell Out, the Klaatu story.
Oh, wow.
And it's more of a biopic. Yeah, it's more of a biopic than a documentary.
Yeah.
So there would be like actors and it would all be factual, no fiction in it. But Richie York appears in this thing, and I was talking to him in order to get him to talk to this woman who's written it when she was writing it and working him into the story. And he's such a character. He said that he would allow us to use his character persona in this movie, provided Russell Crowe played him. So if you see Russell Crowe, let him know.
I have bumped into Russell Crowe once. I was working at a place in Hobart, Rest Point Hotel, the first casino in Tasmania.
Oh, cool.
I think it might have been the first casino ever opened in Australia, actually. But did you know Russell Crowe had a band called, what was it called?
Yes.
100 Foot of Grunt or something like that?
Yeah, it's a little country for me.
Yeah, and he was playing that night, and I was down because I was working there. I was having some dinner that night, and he wandered into the lunchroom off the stage, and he was looking around all over the place trying to find a toilet. So that's my brush with Russell Crowe, directing him to the toilet. There you go.
You know what? I have a great toilet story too. This is one of my favorites. John and I went to England in the late 80s to record a song for a German TV show. We did it there because Dee was working for George Martin at Air London, and he ran the MIDI room for a few years there. And he'd been asked by this German TV show to record this song they had and wanted Klaatu to do it. And so John and I flew over and spent a week there. Long story short is I was upstairs at Air London studio in the lounge area. I'm sitting on the couch minding my own business, and Boy George came up the stairs. And so as Boy George was cresting the stairs, I got up and started walking across the room because I was going to introduce myself and say, hey, thanks for the work. I was a big fan of Culture Club. There was something about that reggae Europop thing they did that I found very charming. And I got up to go and introduce myself and say thanks. And when he got to the top of the stairs, he turned left and went into the ladies' room.
Oh, what?
So I went and sat back down and thought about it, and I said, nah, I'll meet him another time. I wasn't sure if he was going to wash his hands or not. I didn't know. I didn't know how to handle it, Dwayne. So I never met Boy George. I have a better one.
Okay.
We did the third album, the Sir Army Suit album, We did that here in Toronto at a studio called Sounds Interchange, and they had 2 rooms. And while we were there for like 3 months. And while we were there, Black Sabbath came in and booked the big room. They were only there for like 3 weeks, and that's all it takes them to do a whole album. And so, and Dee and I were working the night shift. We'd go in at 7, 8 at night and work till dawn. And John and Terry Brown would work on the day shift because we had block booked this room. So you got to maximize your time. You're paying for it. You got to use it. Back then, studio time was like $150 an hour or something ludicrous. Excuse me. Anyway, I got to be very close to Ozzy, hanging out. The first day I met him, we were in the recreation area, and we get introduced. He said, "Would you like a beer?" And I said, "Sure, let's have a beer." Well, he opened the fridge, and I don't think you could have squeezed a pickle in this fridge. It was full of Newcastle Brown. And I drank that beer for quite a while till somebody said, "Don't you find that awfully sweet?" And it was like, oh my God, that's one sweet beer, isn't it? Anyway, when I first met Ozzy and we were hanging out, he took me around to introduce me to the band. And when we came up to Bill Ward always had his shirt off. He never wore a shirt when he played. I guess he sweats a lot or whatever. Anyway, we come up behind Bill Ward, and Bill has this growth on his back, like an elongated wart. I think it's called a skin tag.
Yep.
And it's unattractive growth on his back. And Ozzy comes up and he says, "Terry, I'd like to introduce you to Eric. Eric, this is Terry." And he says, "Terry, Eric has this growth on him named Bill Ward." And I died laughing. Bill Ward turned around and said, "Fuck off, Ozzy." Because he probably heard this a dozen times, right? So I got introduced to the growth on Bill Ward's back. And I found it extremely funny.
Terry, you mentioned before that that you met Black Sabbath once, and it took them 3 weeks to record an album. With you guys, the very first album you did, released in 1976, 40 years ago, it took you 3 years. Long process.
Yeah. Well, a number of reasons for that. Number one, I think, is that we had to use downtime. We all had jobs. In fact, I was the head of the 45 department at Sam the Record Man, the big record store in Toronto here, working the night shift, and for pittance. But it was a job, and so we used downtime. And the other thing is that we were very meticulous. And it turned out to be a really bonus for us, because we got to review everything, and nothing stayed on tape unless it was absolutely perfect and necessary. There's a great quote from David Bowie, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it. It's something to the effect of, you get 25 years to make your first record, you got 6 months to make the second. And so what he's saying, in effect, is that you take your lifetime of experiences in those 25 years and force them into 10 songs or whatever, an album's worth of material. And then you only have 6 months to do it again. And the follow-ups aren't usually as good as the first albums. There's a lot of cases where that's the truth. And I think the Klaatu album is case in point. So yeah, it took a long time. It took 3 years, but it was worth it.
But of course, the first release that you put out was in '73, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, every time we had 2 songs, we would release a single.
And how did they go for you?
Not well. I mean, even when the album came out in August of '76. There were no sales to speak of. Well, there was some sales. My mom bought a few. It wasn't an event. I mean, it was for us, but the media just didn't get it, and nobody. And there were nice reviews. So it sounds a bit like Pink Floyd meets the Beatles, and I hear some Beach Boys and different comments like that. But it was released to very little acclaim. It wasn't until March of '77. When that fellow in Providence, Rhode Island in the U.S. wrote his article that suggested that we might be the Beatles recording under a new name. and of course then it went wild, and that's 6 months after the fact. When this rumor broke, Dwayne, we were actually in England recording the London Philharmonic Orchestra on top of the bed tracks we'd done for the Hope album at Olympic Studio, which was a real thrill. Olympic Studio had seen the Moody Blues record there, King Crimson, one of my all-time favorite bands, Deep Purple, and even the Beatles had recorded, they left Abbey Road for some reason, I can't remember the details, but they recorded Baby You're a Rich Man at Olympic Studio. So there's quite a history there.
I don't know if you follow Eurovision at all, Terry?
No.
Well, Australia has, for the last 2 years, strangely enough, has been part of Eurovision, believe it or not.
Okay.
And the representative for Australia this year was a lady called Dami Im. She won X Factor here in Australia a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And yeah, Australia came second in Eurovision, which is very interesting because usually the winner hosts the next Eurovision. So it would have been very funny if Australia won and we hosted Eurovision.
I see the irony.
What's interesting about Dami Im, though, is that I saw her here in Tasmania perform over the weekend, and she was actually promoting an album called Classic Carpenters. Because she grew up with her parents really thrashing the Carpenters to death. What disappointed me is when I turned over the album cover and Calling Occupants was not on the track list. That's probably, would you say that'd be your most successful song that you've written?
Absolutely. And I'm not surprised that she didn't do that, because I was extremely surprised when the Carpenters did it. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, I was a closet Carpenters fan back in the 70s when they recorded our song. I would, if I listened to a King Crimson album or a Genesis or Pink Floyd or something, I was right into the prog rock. And when I listened to that music, I was always dissecting it and trying to figure out who was doing what and how they got there and how they wrote it and the chord structure. I was working when I was listening to this music. When I wanted to just listen to music and not work, I would put on Frank Sinatra or Streisand or the Carpenters. So I was a big Carpenters fan. Songs like Rainy Days and Mondays to this day blow me away. I sit at the piano and play these schmaltzy tunes because the chord progressions are so rich and the melodies are so powerful, and the lyric too. I mean, they're just wonderfully written songs, and they were beautifully recorded. So when the Carpenters stepped out of their comfort zone and recorded our song, not only was I surprised, but I was delighted. Frank Davies, who was our pseudo manager, met them in Vegas just after they'd finished recording the album, and he came home with test pressings, which are like these acetates, records, in a plain white sleeve. And Karen had written on it, "Dear Klaatu, we've been observing your group," and signed Karen, and Richard signed it. I still have that framed on the wall in my studio. That's one of my prized possessions. And further to that, there was a program just a couple of months ago, or last month possibly? Yes, last month in England, and it's called The Nation's Favorite Carpenter Song. And they've done a few of these shows. They've done the Beatles twice and the Bee Gees and somebody else, I can't remember now. But Calling Occupants came in fifth. And this TV show from England sent a crew over here back in March to interview John and I and film us for a segment in this TV show where we talked about, the Carpenters recording our song and what a thrill it was, and all of that. And so, yeah, it's nice to see that the Carpenters are still well respected. They don't get a lot of airplay here in North America. I think they were just a little too brother and sister, too cutesy clean, their image. It was kind of like ABBA, but only half of them.
Tell me a little bit more about Calling Occupants, about the process behind that. That was a song written by you and John, right?
Yeah. John and I, and D2, we were all very much sci-fi enthusiasts. and anything to do with UFOs and stuff like that was particularly interesting. And I was reading all those books by von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods and stuff like that. Anyway, John and I had found this book at the library one day called The Flying Saucer Reader, written in 1953. In this book, there was a chapter dedicated to mental telepathy. And it was about the IFSB, which is the International Flying Saucer Bureau, had asked its members around the world to memorize this message and simultaneously recite it, that they might use mental telepathy to reach out to the aliens and get them to come and save us from ourselves. And of course, the message, we used it almost verbatim. The message goes, calling occupants of interplanetary craft, calling occupants of interplanetary craft, we are your friends. Please come in peace and help us. It goes on and on. Anyway, it's not a very long message, but when John and I found this, it was like, oh my God, what if we were to take this and turn it into a song, and it got played on the radio and became a big hit, and maybe the radio waves would reach out further than our puny brains. And so that was the impetus. Truly, that was the impetus for recording this song, was to make contact with the aliens, to further the agenda of the International Flying Saucer Bureau. Many years later, this event, and it was called World Contact Day, which we use in the song, that event was held on March 15th, the Ides of March, 1953. So it was many years ago, and there's still there's a Facebook page for it, and I've posted our song up there, and we're still waiting for the aliens. I keep one eye sort of up to the skies, you know, waiting for them to come, but they haven't contacted me. They don't write, they don't phone. I don't know.
And so, how did the Bureau take your song?
I'm not sure. I think that it was dismantled many years ago, because the song came out in 1976. And that's 23 years after the message was first memorized and recited. So I don't know if the IFSB is even still in business.
That was one of the biggest hits because of the Carpenters. Was it because of the Beatles rumor that the Carpenters picked up on your music, or had they been watching you before that?
No, it was distinctly the Beatle rumor. They were all Beatle fans. The Carpenters talk about the 3 Bs, and it's the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and Bacharach. It's not Bach, Beethoven, and who's the other guy? Help me out here. Brahms? Anyway, their guitar player had found our album because of the rumor and brought it into them to play. And Frank Davies was telling us that when he met with them at their hotel suite in Las Vegas, they were singing him snippets from all the different songs on the album, because they were much taken with our record. It was a very thrilling time. It was a very thrilling time, Dwayne, to have a band of that stature record one of the songs that I had co-written. It still amazes me to this day, and it's very sad that Karen's not here.
Now, in relation to the album at the time, of course, the big thing about it was that, particularly everywhere else in the world except Canada, there was nothing on there except the band's name, no credits for any band members, production, or anything like that.
And not here in Canada either.
Was 347 EST written on it somewhere?
No, actually, in Canada, yes, actually, it was written on it, but just on the spine.
Oh, okay.
You know,
yep,
down the spine. In fact, the original release in Canada didn't even have the band's name on the cover. Just the sun and that painting that Ted Jones did. And when we reissued the CD a few years ago, we went back to that and without the name on it. Capitol Records had signed us without knowing who we were. Not even names. There was no names, no pictures. They signed us strictly on the strength of the album and the artwork, and that's all they get. The one concession that we made that they demanded was that we put the name of the band on the front of the album, which is probably a good idea. You know, if you're in the record store, you know, you need to know what's going on and what this is. We didn't even want to do that. We wanted just this glorious artwork. And that's one of the things I miss most about the music industry today, not just the great music that's no longer available for the most part, but the 12 by 12 graphic images of an album cover and the fold out and all that great stuff, the art that went with rock albums, pop albums, record albums in general. That is sadly missed.
This album in particular, for me personally, is one of my favorite album covers of all time, because this record was one of the first ones I owned. So when I was, you know, very young, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was sitting there listening to it and watching, well, I was watching the record spin, and, you know, a very tactile experience looking at every detail of the artwork. It was really nice.
One of the things I found with the Klaatu music is that we had a lot of success throughout Europe, countries like Germany, and I noticed that Pink Floyd and bands also of that nature also have success there. And I think what it is that the music we made, it transcends the language barrier. The stories that we're trying to tell the lyric goes hand in hand with the music. The music is telling the same story as the lyric, so we're getting our message across without necessarily having to communicate verbally. Am I making myself clear?
Absolutely. I don't know if you remember, but when I spoke to you and John years ago now, my co-host was Nobby. He was a German.
Oh, yes.
And he still is,
yes.
Mind you.
He's still German?
He's still German, yeah.
Okay.
But he said, yeah, growing up in Germany, all the popular music was in English. But they used to pick their music based on what it sounded like, because they couldn't understand the lyrics. So
right.
So yeah, he could relate to that very well. And a lot of the stuff he introduced to me was based on the fact that it sounded good, rather than the lyrics had some catchy meaning to it.
We made a conscious effort to make the music sound like the lyric. We wanted to tell the story both musically and verbally. And so that marriage was really important to us. To this day, it's very rare that I sit down at the piano and start writing music. I mean, I do it all the time, but I rarely keep any of it. It ends up in the garbage. Everything I do, 95% of all the music I make starts with a concept or an idea or a lyrical phrase or a chorus, and then I design the music to fit that thought, that idea. If it's a sad idea, I use minor chords, and so that marriage has always been very important to me.
Was there last year, towards the end of the year, a 40th anniversary release of 347 EST?
Yeah, they jumped the gun a little bit. We had our own record label for a while, and it was only available through our website, and it was kind of not going anywhere. And it was okay for a while, though, because it filled a niche. But we got approached by a company in Canada called Conveyor, who are distributed by Universal, and they've said that they will try to get this back out there, because we've remastered the first 3 albums and they sound significantly better. And anyway, so they've repackaged it with this new version that we did. I did a new 20-page booklet with Ted Jones that's quite elaborate, all new artwork and stuff like that. And so they did a reissue back in November, a year ago, in getting in readiness for the 40th anniversary, which is 2016. So it's out there, and you can get it at Amazon.
So that's the same remaster that was released for the 35th, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the 2011 Klaatu's Records remaster. It's the same audio. They have repackaged it into what do they call that new format? It's not in a jewel case. It's quite a nice elaborate package. And in fact, it has 2 booklets in it, because they added a second booklet of liner notes from this journalist here in Canada, Nick Cruin, who's well respected and had very nice things to say about the album.
Excellent. And do you know how that's been going since it's been reissued?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm pretty much consumed with living in the present. I put an album out in January of my own stuff, and I have another one coming out a week today. So I've been very busy doing music, not dwelling on the past. Although I'm delighted to be speaking with you and talking about the great memories I have of 40 years ago.
Did you imagine yourself sitting here speaking to someone about it 40 years ago? That record?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
No, but although, I say that rather quickly, but when we made the first album, we really knew that we were doing something that was good. We knew that we were doing high quality music. Terry Brown was the best engineer in Canada. He had learned his craft. I forget what studio, may have been Olympic, but he worked with, when he was a tape op or an assistant engineer, he worked with Traffic and Donovan, and he was on all sorts of great sessions, and he is one of the finest engineers in Canada, and so he made everything we did, he made it sound fabulous. I can remember when the Elton John album came out, I guess it was the one with Rocket Man, and it was really state-of-the-art recording techniques, and Terry had picked it up so he could listen to it to see what was going on, so he would keep abreast of all the latest technological advancements. I mean, he immediately went out and bought an Eventide digital delay. Digital delay was brand new, something that had never existed before. What we had instead was tape delay, and depending on the speed that the tape ran, you would feed it a sound, and it would record on the one head and then play it back immediately on the playhead. So you would get a delay, cha, 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 depending on the speed that you ran the tape. In order to get a digital delay, which is an extremely quick delay, it was very difficult because tape recorders didn't run that fast. We actually mimicked digital delay by having 2 tape machines going. One was in fast forward, and the tape went off of that machine to another machine which was in record mode. And that's where we fed the signal and recovered it. But because the other tape recorder was going fast forward, like very quickly, we got a very quick delay. So I get, and that was, and we put that's on the guitar in Little Neutrino. And not only did we have that very quick delay going on, but while the tape was screaming fast past the tape head, Dee was wobbling it with a pencil. So you would get a detuning effect. These are the things that you had to do before technology came along. So all of this experimentation and state-of-the-art recording techniques, plus we had some damn good songs that made that album what it is. And it's become timeless. It doesn't sound dated. The music still sounds fresh and relevant. It's not, it doesn't sound like, sometimes I put my Moody Blues albums on, and they just sound a little bit 60s, They don't transcend the years. Some songs better than others, of course. But the 347 EST remains fresh.